Imagine being a perfectly healthy 12-year-old girl sitting in class one morning. No one told a joke. Nothing funny happened. And then, out of nowhere, you started laughing. And you couldn't stop. That's exactly what happened in Tanzania in 1962. And it is so much stranger, so much darker, and so much more terrifying than the name Laughing Plague makes it sound. Because here's the thing, most people get completely wrong about this story. They hear laughing epidemic, and they picture a room full of kids giggling uncontrollably, like someone slipped a whoopee cushion under every seat. But the people who lived through this, they weren't having fun. They were terrified. They were in pain. Some of them ran screaming into the bush. I've gone deep on this one. The original reports, the medical research, the colonial documents that almost nobody talks about. And what I found is that almost every version of this story you've seen leaves out the most disturbing parts. So here's what we're actually covering today. Why the laughter wasn't really laughter. Why the people who tried to stop it accidentally made it 10 times worse. And why, more than 60 years later, scientists still cannot fully explain what happened. And that might be the most unsettling fact of all. Let's start with what actually happened on January 30th, 1962. A 12-year-old student at a boarding school called Kashasha, in what is now Tanzania, began laughing at nothing. Witnesses said there was no visible trigger, no joke, no funny face, just laughter, starting from nowhere, like a switch flipped inside her. Within hours, other girls in her class started too. Within days, 95 of the school's 159 students were affected. And here's the detail that the laughing plague label buries completely. The laughter kept getting interrupted. By crying, by screaming, by fainting. Some students scratched themselves so hard they drew blood. Some ran out of the school building into the surrounding bush in what looked like pure animal terror. Survivors who described the experience later didn't say it felt funny or euphoric. They said it felt like dying. Their muscles cramped. They couldn't breathe properly. Teachers watching from the sidelines thought they were witnessing a mass seizure disorder. This wasn't a room full of kids cracking up. This was a room full of kids falling apart. But that's important, because what happened next tells us something even more revealing. Not just about the outbreak, but about the era it happened in. When British colonial medical officers arrived to investigate, they wrote in their official reports that the students' African heritage and, quote, emotional susceptibility made them prone to hysteria. They essentially filed the whole thing under "these girls are just excitable by nature" and moved on. Not a medical crisis, not worth urgent investigation, just a cultural weakness. That framing, that dismissal, delayed serious scientific investigation by weeks. And in an outbreak that was spreading by the day, weeks mattered enormously. It's a detail almost nobody includes when they tell this story, but it's the reason the world wasn't paying close attention when things got dramatically worse. Because here's where the authorities made their biggest mistake. In March 1962, they closed the school. Logical, right? Get the students away from each other, break the chain, stop the spread. Except that's not what happened. The students went home. They traveled back to their villages across the Kagera region, and they brought it with them. At least 14 new outbreak sites ignited across the region. The containment strategy itself became the transmission mechanism. The thing they did to stop it is what spread it. That specific, jaw-dropping irony almost never makes it into the popular retellings of this story. One of those new outbreak sites was a village called Ramashenia, and what happened there pushed the whole event into a different category of strange. Because the outbreak in Ramashenia didn't just hit kids, it hit adults, working adults. And so many of them were incapacitated simultaneously that the local economy temporarily shut down, people stopped farming, markets stopped running. The village, for a period, just stopped functioning. That mattered scientifically because the early theory was that only young, impressionable students were vulnerable. That this was something about adolescent psychology or the school environment. Ramashenia blew that theory apart. This thing could take down a whole community. Now here's something that almost nobody mentions when they talk about this outbreak. Most videos and articles present it as one contained event that burned out and ended. But it was actually a rolling series of flare-ups that authorities repeatedly failed to fully extinguish. And then, 3 years later, it happened again. In 1963, a nearly identical outbreak hit Bukoba, also in Tanzania. Same symptoms, same combination of uncontrolled laughter, crying, and fainting. Then again, in 1965, in a community near the Uganda border. The 1962 outbreak wasn't a random anomaly. It was potentially the most visible episode in a recurring regional pattern tied to specific social and environmental conditions that researchers have never fully mapped. That's the part that should keep you up at night. Not that it happened once. that it kept happening. So what was actually causing it? Here's where the science gets genuinely fascinating and genuinely humbling. The most credible modern explanation comes from researchers who study something called mass psychogenic illness. One of the leading experts, Dr. Robert Bartholomew, has documented over 600 events like this across recorded history. And his argument, along with other researchers in this field, is that what happened in Kashasha was a physical stress response, specifically, an uncontrolled release of tension through the limbic system, the part of your brain that handles emotion and survival instincts. The students at Kashasha weren't just going to school, they were living under documented crushing pressure. British-style colonial examinations that could define their entire futures. Severe food insecurity, the weight of their family's hopes resting entirely on their performance. These were 12-year-old girls carrying invisible loads that would buckle most adults. And the theory is that the body, under that kind of sustained, unrelenting stress, can break in ways that look nothing like what we expect. The nervous system essentially hits a limit and releases not through tears or anger, but through something that looks, from the outside, like laughter, but feels, from the inside, like collapse. Think of it as your body's emergency pressure valve going off, except the valve itself is contagious. Because here's the thing about mass psychogenic illness that makes it so strange and so hard to wrap your head around. It spreads socially, not through bacteria, not through a virus you can put under a microscope. It spreads through seeing, through proximity, through the specific social bonds that exist inside a tight-knit community. And that brings us to maybe the strangest single detail in this entire story. Not one teacher got sick, not one European staff member at any of the affected schools showed a single symptom, despite being in the same rooms, breathing the same air, eating the same food, for weeks on end. Zero. None. Researchers noticed the exact same immunity pattern in authority figures during the dancing plague of 1374 in Aachen, Germany, another famous mass psychogenic event from history, and the explanation they keep coming back to is this: social hierarchy creates a psychological buffer. When you're in a position of power and perceived control, your nervous system processes threat differently. The stress response that triggers in someone who feels trapped, helpless, and under enormous pressure, it simply doesn't fire the same way in someone who feels in control of their environment. The people with power didn't catch it. The people without power did. Make of that what you will. If you're finding this as fascinating as I did when I first went down this rabbit hole, drop a comment below, tell me which part hit you hardest. And if you want to see more deep dives into history's strangest and most overlooked events, hit subscribe. I do these every week and some of the upcoming ones are genuinely wild. Now, the honest scientific answer that's more unsettling than any conspiracy theory: we still don't actually know what caused it. Not with certainty. Not in a way that would satisfy a scientist who needed to write a definitive paper and stake their reputation on it. The mass psychogenic illness classification is what researchers call a diagnosis of exclusion. It's the label you apply when you've ruled out every biological agent, every toxin, every neurological mechanism you can test for, and nothing else fits. It's not "we know what this is." It's "we know what it isn't, and this is what's left." No confirmed pathogen, no toxin in the food or water. No definitive neurological cause. After 60 years of study, the 1962 Tanzania laughing epidemic remains genuinely, scientifically unexplained at its core. And that is the part that should actually shake you. Because what it implies is this: the human nervous system, under the right social conditions, can produce symptoms severe enough to shut down entire communities. Muscle cramps, respiratory distress, fainting, screaming, people running into the bush in terror. All of it generated from the inside out, with no external biological cause, just stress and fear and the invisible social connections between human beings. And we cannot fully predict when it will happen. We cannot fully explain why it happens, and we definitely cannot guarantee it won't happen again. So let's bring it all together. One girl started laughing at nothing. Within days, nearly 100 students were affected. The symptoms weren't funny, they were physically agonizing and terrifying. Colonial authorities dismissed it as racial weakness and wasted weeks. The school closure spread it to 14 new locations. It lasted 18 months, hit over 1,000 people, and triggered at least 2 near-identical follow-up outbreaks in the same region. The people in power never caught it. And to this day, nobody has a complete, confirmed, scientific explanation for what happened. The laughing plague wasn't a quirky historical footnote. It was a window into something about human beings that we still don't fully understand. If this story made you think about something differently, share it with someone. And if you want to go further down the rabbit hole, I've covered other events where reality turned out to be far stranger than the popular version. The next one might be even harder to believe. See you there.